As mentioned, interpersonal victimization is different from intergroup exclusion. Interpersonal victimization has been studied from the perspective of clinical development theory. Most recently, victimization has been studied from moral emotions clinical development theory that integrates affect, event, and affect cognition models. One goal of this theory has been to explain why children behave aggressively and victimize others, while others refrain from aggression and bullying behavior and bullying behavior in peer groups. A basic premise of this theory is that social and moral emotions such as guilt, empathy, or respect serve important motivational functions to resolve interpersonal conflict and to understand children's aggression, bullying behavior, and victimization. Because emotions in social and moral situations highlight the negative consequences of acts of victimization and bullying for self and others. They provide insight into children's motivation to engage in or refrain from aggression. An interesting and unanswered question to be described in more detail later is whether these emotions are related to children's motivation to engage in or refrain from aggression. An interesting and unanswered question to be described in more detail is whether these emotions are related to children's motivation to engage in intergroup exclusion such as prejudice and bias. A studies by Sirkasma, this Verkutten and Counter is one of the first to examine this relation. However, we first need to examine what is known about individual motivation based on moral emotions. Development researchers have pointed to the relevance of emotions such as guilt and sympathy for understanding the genesis of interpersonal aggression and victimization. Self-conscious moral emotions, other-oriented moral emotions, that is sympathy and respect, are conceptually required to aggression, despite violence and antisocial conduct. These emotions can help children and adolescents link emotional consequence that others face to specific events. Example, anticipating feeling guilty about hitting another child because he or she will feel sad, as well as to the severity of these events. Example, hitting another child may have more serious physical and psychological consequences for the child than not helping a child finish his or her homework. Developmental research has identified event related differences in anticipated emotions to self and others. For example, the anticipation of guilt feelings and related emotions differ across domains of social knowledge. This research is essential in understanding the normative development of moral emotions from early childhood to adolescence, because it points to three influences on development as well as its experiences of aggression, bullying, and victimization. The anticipation of moral emotions such as guilt and sympathy also involves coordination of active or affective experience with judgments, social decision making, and an understanding of others' intentions. With age, children develop social cognitive skills which help them coordinate their affective responses with their judgments of and reasoning about moral events. For example, the anticipation of complex moral emotions such as guilt indicates that children can coordinate the judgments of the wrongfulness with our other oriented concern, which may produce empathy induced guilt as a consequential active state. According to this integrative clinical development model of moral emotions, Both specific type of events as well as links between cognition and affect account for differences in the identification of moral and social emotions. This in turn has important implications for children's engagement in aggression and victimization. In line with this theory, an absolute or absence of the self-evaluate emotion of guilt following one's own wrongdoing has been associated with the increased levels of aggression and bullying in commonly based in clinical samples ranging from early childhood to early adulthood. Similarly, low levels of other-oriented concern and sympathy have been shown to be positively related to aggression and bullying. Thus, far links between bullying and victimization and affecting experiences associated with straightforward transgressions have been mostly studied in context of straightforward moral transgressions such as the infliction of harm on another person and stealing desired resources. For example, much of developmental research on links between aggression and guilt has been conducted in the happy victimizer paradigm. In this paradigm, children are presented with hypothetical moral aggression, such as stealing another redeemed chocolate. After presentation of the organization, children are typically asked to anticipate the emulation in the role of a victimizer. One major finding of research using the paradigm is that younger children, 3 to 4 years of age, tend to attribute happy emotions to the self in the role of the victimizer because they focus on the short-term goals or short-term goals. In contrast, the majority of older children tend to attribute sad emotions to the self in the role of a victimizer or shame because they understand the negative long-term consequences of the transition of self as victimizer, the other victimized child, and the relationship between victimizer and the victim, despite developmental change in anticipated moral emotions. Media analytic evidence indicates that the absence of negative emotion attributes to following one's own aggression or transgression in association with aggression and bullying independent of age. Another approach to the study of judgments and emotions in context of victimization has been to use narrative of the child's own moral and social experiences. Gutzwiller and Helen Finger, Gusser and Maikey. Wayne Webb, Braille and Madbury 2000. Because narratives represent contextualized social interactions, it is likely that moral emotions and moral reasoning are different for narratives of real situation and for hypothetical scenarios. Moral emotions clinical development theory has offered a conceptual framework from which to systematically study affective moral development in relation to bullying and victimization. The model ingredients across past traditions that have focused on the development of moral emotions and as well as research that has studied interpersonal experience of bullying and victimization in the context of peer group interactions. This later literature typically utilizes socioeconomic status as an indicator of being liked or disliked and or being popular or unpopular, that is peer acceptance and social terms. In a socioeconomic or sociometric literature, children who are identified as involved in buying behavior and children who are being victimized tend to differ in terms of status and dominance. Specifically, if social status is defined as power, victimizers tend to score as than children who are being shamed.